Welcome back to another Eurocast here, and in this episode we are going to embark on another journey. Here we go again. The revolutions of 1848. You guessed it, we're going to be back at it. So let's talk about some of the important and significant aspects of the year 1848. And a lot of the other episodes I kept hinting towards this year. It's a doozy, all right? It is considered the watershed political event of the 19th century, all right? 1848 revolutions they were influenced by nationalism, they were influenced by liberalism and Romanticism as well. Additionally, there was a lot of economic problems and instability, obviously, because those are the climates that breed revolutions. Only Britain and Russia avoided significant upheaval. You know, there were a lot of liberal reforms, as we've gone over, in England, and that prevented serious popular discontent and anger. Now, in Russia, they avoided revolution, not by making liberal reforms, but quite the opposite. Conservative oppression was the order of the day. So that prevented liberal revolution from actually taking hold in a place like Russia. Neither liberals nor conservatives could gain a permanent upper hand in this era. So it's going to be quite turbulent. Now, in the end, it's going to result in some pretty cool things, including the end of serfdom in the East, in Austria and Germany. It's going to bring universal male suffrage in France, and parliaments will be established in German states, although they're going to be controlled by princes and the aristocracy. But it also is going to stimulate, and again, this is going to be one of those watershed years because it changes everything. It stimulates unification, the unification impulse in Prussia and Sardinia-Piedmont in Italy. So we're going to be pretty soon here talking about a modern German state and a modern Italy. Okay, so the last of liberal revolutions, this is the last of them, dating back to the French Revolution. So that's a plus. All right, this is the last time we're going to be dealing with this stuff as it existed. So there were a lot of tensions pre-1848, long term. So let's talk about those. Industrialization had posed a lot of different economic challenges to rulers. You know, you had a changing where people started to move in the cities, and those people in the cities were living in even though they were better than before, but some just new conditions that nobody really was ready for. And so you're going to have challenges to the artisan class. You're going to have challenges that we're going to have see challenges between skilled and unskilled labor, tensions there, tensions between skilled and unskilled labor and the middle class, and obviously the middle class and the lower classes are still battling the old aristocracy in a lot of these countries. The population, as we learned, doubled in the 18th century. So there were food supply problems, and the old way of dealing with it was malthus, just let them all die. Well, you know, with socialism and some of those ideas that we've learned about, that's unacceptable for a lot of people. And again, just said socialism, those ideological challenges, liberalism, nationalism, democracy, socialism, all of those are going to have different opinions on what these different governments, how they should handle a lot of these problems. So it's going to create a lot of tension. Romanticism as a movement, you can check out the video from Tom Ritchie on my website, as well as make sure you read that particular part of the chapter. We're not going to have time to go over all of that stuff, but maybe we can discuss it a little bit in class here coming up. But then again, you know, we've talked about some of these long-term problems, dealing with a lot of those new ideologies, and the old way of dealing with it, I call it Metternich, the conservative approach where the Carlsbad decrees just crush it, or in England the Six Acts, crush it. A lot of these states had created secret police to deal with a lot of these problems. But by 1848, you know, people aren't going to be scared of those things as much, and they're going to be willing to test how far these conservative powers that are in power are going to be willing to keep the status quo. How much are they going you know, to continue to prevent these ideas from taking shape. Now, short term, what started a lot of this stuff in 1848, again, a lot of crisis that we've talked about have started over taxes and, you know, crop failures, famines. So there was another agricultural crisis. You had poor cereal harvests. We had extreme inflation. Prices could rise anywhere from 60% in 1 year. We've already talked about the potato blight in Ireland in the 1840s, and so prices were rising for some 135% for food in 1 year. I mean, imagine if that happened now. You know, a lot of us would go hungry. So yet again, we have not only an agricultural crisis, we have a financial crisis. There were further investment bubbles which burst. Remember, on the continent in Europe, in many cases, the governments had paved the way for people to invest in government-run railroads and in the iron and coal industries. Well, some of those bubbles in the early forms of capitalism, you have major ups and major downs. So we had some bubbles bursting. We basically have a full-fledged depression. As a result, unemployment is going to increase rapidly among the lower classes. And as I have on this slide, working and middle classes were now joined in misery. And when you take the working class and the middle class and join them in misery, you're going to have revolution. I mean, that's how the initial French Revolution started. So, you know, you got the urban and the agricultural peasantry up in arms and wanting to do something about that. So basically, where does it start? Where do you think it starts? Here we go, yet another French Revolution. And, you know, basically, we got to talk about, so what went wrong? Weren't we like in this moderate phase? We've got Louis Philippe, we've got the citizen king, the bourgeois monarch, and the problem is we got to talk about the leadership that he allowed in his cabinet, and that was under Francois Guizot. And if you remember, he didn't want to make any reforms. He was the party of resistance. So his economic policies, they worked initially, I should say, but they favored the middle class and the industrialists. They imposed high tariffs, and they chose those high tariffs to protect the industrialists from competition, as we mentioned, from imported goods. So the tariffs also protected the French landowners, the elite, from competition of imported grain. So the government showed really little concern, if any, for the urban poor. You know, poor harvests, as we've talked about, and poor economy finally did in the July monarchy. And from 1840 to 1848, the conservative-minded Guizot dominates the government, as we've indicated, and he seemed to just be randomly making decisions, not based on reason or logic, but in blatant arrogance that he knows what's best. And that's all fine and good if things go well, but when things turn south, he's going to have problems on his hands. And the opposition to him really mounted in 1846 and 47, when there was, in fact, the poor grain harvest that I'd mentioned earlier, and a severe industrial depression began. So the political crisis reached a head in February of 1848, and that's important because you need to know this as the February Revolution. Okay, so the February Revolution started when the working classes and liberals became upset at Louis Philippe and Guizot for opposing electoral reform that would give people the right to vote. So they started protesting policies and did so by holding banquets in which they would meet and discuss reforms and basically bash the king. Guizot got wind of this and began banning these banquets. One such liberal banquet was banned. It was actually disguised as an honor to George Washington. So people started protesting, and troops opened fire on peaceful protesters. Barricades went up yet again, and that let the looting begin. The socialists were the most radical faction of this uprising, and they were led by the socialist Louis Blanc. The National Guard defected to help the radicals. You may have seen this in Les Miserables. So the National Guard that was supposed to be the French military actually defects to help the lower classes. King Louis Philippe loses control of Paris and abdicates on February 24th, thus the February Revolution. When Louis abdicated, a temporary government went into place. It was basically a coalition. However, I might add, this coalition did not last long. The coalition was of liberals, both moderates and radicals, as well as Republicans, moderates. So you basically have this evolution. You have Republicans, who are kind of the moderates, versus socialists, who are the most radical. And as you can imagine, that harmony in this coalition is not going to last very long because they're going to distrust one another. So the new government, after Louis Philippe abdicates, was known as the Second French Republic. If you remember the first one, it was Robespierre and the Reign of Terror. All right. So this one is actually led by a liberal, Alphonse Lamartine. And he was allied with both the bourgeoisie, as I said, this coalition, as well as the radicals, who in this case would be the socialists. Speaking of socialists, Louis Blanc the socialist thinker who we introduced earlier, he was the guy that was basically the leader for the working classes, and he demanded work for the unemployed. He believed in the right to work. Again, we talked about the Falinist theories, and his concept was the National Workshop that we've introduced, and he created those to provide work for the unemployed. And again, that was part of why this revolution had started, because of the out of work and the bad economy that was plaguing not just France but all of Europe at this particular time. So again, they made some other successful reforms. This Second Republic government, they abolished slavery in the empire. They established the 10-hour workday in Paris, and they also abolished the death penalty. So some of these liberal reforms actually mirrored some of the things that were actually implemented in England in the 1840s as well. But as we said, England was able to do them in a more moderate fashion without the revolution. So anyway, there was, as I mentioned, the financial crisis is the issue that once again sparks the split in this unharmonious attempt to govern France. Okay, so initially when they took over, the economy wasn't as bad. It actually made some gains. However, it didn't get any better. So this coalition began to pick each other apart. They fight over the timing of the elections to the Constituent Assembly, when they will be held. They disagree over the costs of government social programs. Much like Louis Blanc's workshops. A lot of the middle class, they didn't like it. They didn't like the taxes. They felt that they violated laissez-faire. Closer to the center, liberals wondered if they were becoming too radical and against the ways of Adam Smith and laissez-faire. So they also argued to the answer of the question of whether you could have liberty for all men and still have a system based on private property. And if you remember, many liberals still advocated for the protection of private property. However, many leftists or radical socialists were against its protection and wanted more collectivization of not just private property but also businesses. And so there was growing social tension between the working class and the bourgeoisie middle class regarding the nature of work, the right to unionize, different pay levels, things of that nature. So again, here we have capital versus labor, and additionally there was the flight of capital. And what I mean by that is the fact that they needed increased in taxes to pay for the national workshops and some of these socialized programs. It gave incentive for wealthy industrialists to look elsewhere to open up their businesses where they wouldn't have as high of taxes. So anyway, just the stink hits the fan when the stock market crashes, and there was a 55% decline. And we already talked about the increase of taxes on everybody to pay for these social programs. They went up around 45%. Everyone's taxes went up. And again, when things aren't good, increased taxes usually hurts the little guy even worse, more so than the guy at the top. So in April, there were new elections. There were elections for a new Constituent Assembly. And as we see, this conflict between the liberal capitalists and the socialists, it just escalates. The elections resulted in a conservative majority in the National Assembly. And again, when I say conservative, I'm not talking about the old school conservative. I'm talking about the conservative with the middle class, the bourgeoisie, and the business owners. They attain a majority in the National Assembly, and they continued the debate of if they should keep the social programs, and a lot of people were against keeping Blanc's workshops. They dropped him altogether from the assembly and basically in the end shut down all of his national workshops. And that, as you can imagine, got the masses all fired up. It was very similar to when Louis XVI, if you remember, dropped Jacques Necker as his financial minister in 1789. So we've seen this before in France. And so the workers, they go a little bit over the top. They seek a revolutionary republic after Blanc was dropped from the assembly. So this is where we get into what you read about, June Days. It marks the official revolution, the beginning of the revolution of 1848. So with Blanc out and workshops closed, workers rise up in Paris in open insurrection. All right, it marks the beginning of class warfare in France between the bourgeoisie and the working class. Workers sought war against poverty and some type of redistribution of the wealth or the income. Barricades go up in the streets once again to oppose government forces, and as I said, this actual event is what was based on Les Mis. I think I said that a little bit earlier. you know, and again, I'm not an expert in the movie or anything like that, but this is what, if you've seen that movie, that musical, this is all about. So the June Days was the beginning of the Revolution of 1848. I'm going to end here, and I'm going to have to put the rest of the French Revolution of 1848 on another episode. Thanks for listening. See ya.